The gunshot that shattered the dawn silence sent Sadie Kingston flying from her bed, bare feet hitting the cold floorboards as her fingers closed around the Winchester propped against the wall. Through the window of her small ranch house, the sky was bleeding pink and gold over the California hills, and in the north pasture, she could see dark shapes moving among her cattle, 5 riders working fast to separate the herd. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she pulled on her boots and grabbed her rope, not bothering with anything more than the nightshirt that hung to her knees under her heavy coat. The Rustlers had made their biggest mistake, hitting her land instead of someone else's, because Sadie Kingston knew every inch of these 300 acres, and she had learned to rope a steer before most girls learned to sew a straight line. She was out the door and running toward the stable when she heard the second shot, this one closer, and she dropped low instinctively, her breath coming fast in the cold morning air. The stable door hung open, and inside she could hear Maple, her sorrel mare, stamping nervously in her stall. Sadie slipped inside and pressed herself against the wall, listening hard. Footsteps crunched in the dirt outside, and a man's voice called out something she could not quite catch. Her fingers worked quickly, coiling the rope properly as she moved deeper into the shadows of the stable. She had spent 6 years building this ranch from nothing after her father died, every cow representing weeks of hard work and careful breeding, and she would be damned if some 2-bit cattle thieves took it all away before breakfast. The mare whinnied softly as Sadie approached, and she laid a gentle hand on the horse's neck, feeling the tension in the animal's muscles. No time to saddle up properly. She grabbed a bridle from the hook and slipped it over Maple's head, then threw a blanket across her back and vaulted up, her nightshirt bunching around her thighs as she urged the horse forward. They burst from the stable at a gallop, and Sadie got her first clear look at the Rustlers in the growing light. 5 men, just as she had thought, all of them focused on the cattle and none of them expecting trouble from the ranch house. She angled Maple toward the rocky outcropping on the east side of the pasture, a route that would bring her around behind them, her rope already spinning in her right hand. The first Rustler never saw her coming. She rode up fast and quiet, the rope sailing through the air in a perfect loop that settled around his shoulders and jerked tight as she wheeled Maple around. The man hit the ground hard with a startled yell, and suddenly all 5 of them were shouting, their horses rearing in confusion. Sadie did not give them time to recover. She released the rope and was already building another loop, her legs guiding Maple through the chaos of frightened cattle and cursing men. The second Rustler tried to draw his gun, but her rope caught him around the wrist and yanked his arm up, the pistol flying from his grip to disappear in the tall grass. She dragged him sideways out of his saddle, then released that rope too and went for number 3. This one was smarter or faster, and he managed to get his horse turned around to face her, his gun already clearing leather. Sadie threw herself flat against Maple's neck as the shot cracked over her head, feeling the mare's powerful muscles surge beneath her as they charged straight at him. At the last second, she sat up and sent her rope flying again, this one catching the Rustler's horse around the front legs. The animal went down in a tangle of limbs, throwing its rider clear, and Sadie was already moving again, her blood singing with adrenaline and fear and something wild she could not name. 2 more Rustlers left, and they were finally getting organized, splitting apart to come at her from different directions. She calculated angles and distances in the part of her mind that had been doing this since she was 12 years old, then made her choice and went after the one on the left. He was young, maybe not much older than her own 23 years, and when her rope settled around his chest and pinned his arms to his sides, the look of shock on his face was almost comical. She jerked him from the saddle and he landed in a heap, rolling twice before coming to a stop. 4 down. 1 to go. Sadie gathered up Maple's reins and turned to face the last rustler, and that was when she realized he had not been trying to attack her at all. He had been running, spurring his horse toward the property line and freedom beyond. She leaned low over Maple's neck and gave the mare her head, and the sorrel leaped forward like she had been born for this moment, her hooves eating up the distance between them. The rustler looked back once, his face pale under his hat, and then Sadie's rope was in the air, spinning, flying, settling perfectly around his torso. She took 2 quick wraps around her saddle horn and braced herself as the rope went taut, and the rustler hit the end of it with enough force to lift him completely out of his saddle. He landed on his back in a cloud of dust. The wind clearly knocked out of him, and Sadie wheeled Maple around to keep the rope tight while she pulled her Winchester from where she had shoved it through her belt at the small of her back. Her hands were shaking now, the aftermath of fear catching up with her, but her voice was steady when she called out, "Any of you boys moves and I will shoot. I am a decent shot with a rope, but I am exceptional with a rifle, and I have had about enough excitement for one morning." The 5 rustlers lay in various positions of discomfort across her north pasture, none of them looking eager to test her claim. Sadie kept Maple moving in a slow circle, the Winchester cradled in her arms, watching them all carefully as the sun climbed higher and painted the California landscape in shades of amber and rose. Her cattle had scattered to the far corners of the pasture, but they were still there, still hers, and the satisfaction of that fact warmed her from the inside out. She had done it, alone, without help, without waiting for rescue or protection, or any of the things people seemed to think a woman needed. That was when she heard the thunder of approaching hooves, and she turned to see a rider coming fast from the direction of the main road, his horse stretching out in a full gallop that spoke of urgency. Sadie kept her rifle ready but did not raise it yet, waiting to see who had decided to join her party. As the rider got closer, she could make out more details. A tall man on a rangy buckskin gelding, wearing a dusty brown hat and a coat that had seen better days. He rode like someone who had been born in a saddle, all easy grace and perfect balance, and when he pulled up 20 feet away, his eyes went wide as he took in the scene before him. "What in the hell?" he said, and it was not quite a question. Sadie kept the Winchester pointed in a generally safe direction but did not lower it. "Who are you and what are you doing on my land?" The man held up both hands slowly, showing they were empty. "Name is Kade Voss. I have been tracking these men for 3 days. They hit a ranch down near Jamestown, killed a man and made off with 40 head of cattle. I am a stock detective, hired by the Cattlemen's Association to bring them in." He nodded toward the rustlers on the ground. "Though it appears you have saved me some trouble." Sadie studied him carefully, noting the badge pinned to his vest, the careful way he sat his horse, the intelligence in his dark eyes as they studied her right back. He was older than her, but not by much, maybe 27 or 28, with the kind of face that would be handsome if it were not quite so serious. "They hit my north pasture about 15 minutes ago," she said. "Figured I would object to that." Something that might have been a smile tugged at one corner of Kade Voss's mouth, but he controlled it quickly. "I can see that. You always chase down armed rustlers in your night clothes, miss." Heat flooded Sadie's face as she remembered exactly what she was wearing, but she lifted her chin and refused to be embarrassed. "Kingston. Sadie Kingston. This is my ranch and those are my cattle, and I do not care if I am wearing a ball gown or a flour sack when someone tries to steal from me. I stop them, and that is what matters." "Fair enough," Kade said, and this time he did not quite manage to hide the smile. I am not arguing with your methods, Miss Kingston, just making an observation. He swung down from his horse in one smooth motion and pulled a length of rope from his saddle bag. If you would like to keep that Winchester trained on them, I will get these boys properly tied up so we can transport them to Sonora for the sheriff. Sonora was the nearest real town, about 8 miles west through the hills, and Sadie had been there twice in the last month for supplies. She nodded slowly, watching as Kade approached the first rustler, the one she had pulled from his saddle right at the start. The man groaned as Kade rolled him over and pulled his arms behind his back, binding his wrists with quick, efficient movements that spoke of long practice. Sadie kept her position on horseback, the rifle ready, her mind racing through everything that needed to happen next. Get the rustlers secured. Make sure none of them were seriously injured. Round up the cattle and check for missing stock. Contact the sheriff. Feed the chickens. Make coffee. The ordinary and extraordinary tasks tangled together in her head until she felt dizzy with it all. Kade worked his way through all 5 rustlers, checking each one for weapons and injuries before trussing them up like Christmas turkeys. When he got to the last one, the young one Sadie had roped forth, the rustler spat in the dirt and glared up at him. This is not legal. You cannot just tie a man up without a trial. I can when that man is caught in the act of stealing cattle, Kade said mildly. He straightened up and looked at Sadie. You have a wagon or a buckboard. We need to get them into town, and I only have the 1 horse. Sadie hesitated, her mind catching up with the reality of the situation. She was standing in her north pasture, wearing a nightshirt and a coat, talking to a strange man about transporting criminals, and the sun was barely an hour into the sky. The sheer absurdity of it hit her all at once, and she felt a laugh bubble up in her chest. She tried to swallow it down, but it escaped anyway, bright and slightly hysterical, and once she started, she could not seem to stop. Kade watched her with those serious dark eyes, and that just made it funnier somehow, until she was gasping for breath and wiping tears from her cheeks. I am sorry, she managed finally. It is just, this is not how I plan to spend my Sunday. I imagine not, Kade said, and there was something warm in his voice now, something that made Sadie look at him more closely. He had a good face, she decided, all strong lines and character, the kind of face that looked like it smiled sometimes even if it was not smiling now. But you handled yourself remarkably well, Miss Kingston. I have been doing this for 5 years, and I have never seen anyone rope 5 men single-handed, especially not before breakfast. The compliment pleased her more than it should have, and Sadie felt her cheeks warm again for an entirely different reason. I have a buckboard in the barn, she said, finding her composure again. But I need to get dressed properly first and make sure none of them needs a doctor. That last one hit the ground pretty hard, Kade nodded. I will watch them. You go do what you need to do. Sadie turned Maple toward the ranch house, then hesitated and looked back. There is coffee on the stove if you want it, probably burnt by now, but better than nothing. Appreciate it, Kade said, and when their eyes met across the pasture, something passed between them that Sadie could not quite name. It felt like recognition, like the moment when you see something for the first time and realize you have been waiting for it your whole life without knowing. She shook her head slightly, dismissing the strange thought, and urged Maple into a trot. She had cattle to check and rustlers to deal with, and no time for whatever foolishness her mind was trying to spin around a stock detective she had known for all of 10 minutes. Inside the ranch house, Sadie stripped off her nightshirt and washed quickly in the basin, the cold water shocking her fully awake. She dressed in her usual ranch clothes, sturdy canvas trousers, a cotton shirt, boots that laced up to her knees, and a vest with enough pockets for all the small necessities of ranch life. She braided her long dark hair and pinned it up out of the way, then looked at herself in the small mirror over the dresser. Her face looked back at her, flushed and bright-eyed, younger than 23 and older at the same time. She looked like someone who had just roped 5 rustlers and lived to tell about it. And there was something fierce and proud in her expression that made her stand a little straighter. When she came back outside, Kade was sitting on the porch steps with a cup of coffee, his hat pushed back on his head and his long legs stretched out in front of him. The 5 rustlers were lined up against the fence rail like laundry hung to dry, all of them conscious and glaring at everything around them. Kade looked up as she approached, and something flickered in his eyes as he took in her ranch clothes. "Coffee was not burnt," he said. "Just strong enough to stand a spoon in." "That is how I like it," Sadie said. She poured herself a cup from the pot she kept warming on the edge of the stove and came to sit on the steps beside him, leaving a careful foot of space between them. "Did any of them give you trouble?" "Nothing I could not handle," Kade said. "The young one, Billy, claims they were just moving strays and did not realize this was private land. The others are not bothering with excuses." He took a long drink of coffee and studied her over the rim of the cup. "How long have you been running this place alone?" "6 years, Sadie said. "My father died when I was 17. Heart gave out one day while he was fixing fence. I found him that evening when he did not come in for supper." The old grief rose up in her chest, familiar as an old coat, but she pushed it aside. "Ranch was not much then, maybe 50 acres and a dozen head of cattle. I built it up slow, added land when I could, bred the herd careful. It is not the biggest spread in the county, but it is mine, and it is good." Kade was quiet for a moment, his dark eyes thoughtful. "Your mother died when I was born. Fever." Sadie finished her coffee and set the cup down, then stood and brushed off her trousers. "We should get moving if we are going to make Sonora before noon. Sheriff Coleman will want statements from both of us, and I need to be back here by evening to check the stock properly." They hitched 2 of the rustlers' horses to Sadie's buckboard and loaded the 5 men into the back, none too gently. Kade tied his buckskin behind the wagon, then climbed up onto the driver's seat beside Sadie without asking permission. She raised an eyebrow at him but did not object, just clucked to the team and set them moving down the rutted track that led from her ranch to the main road. The morning was warming up nicely, the spring sunshine pouring down over the California hills like honey, and despite everything that had happened, Sadie felt her spirits lift. She was alive. Her cattle were safe, and the rustlers were caught. Whatever happened next, she had handled the crisis herself, and that knowledge sat warm and solid in her chest. Kade was quiet beside her, his eyes scanning the landscape with the careful attention of someone who missed nothing. "After a while," he said, "you learn to rope like that from your father. He taught me the basics," Sadie said. "The rest I figured out myself. Had to, living out here alone. Could not afford to hire help, and even if I could, most men do not take kindly to working for a woman." She glanced at him sideways. "Present company excluded, apparently." "I am not working for you," Kade pointed out. "Just working alongside you for the moment." But there was no heat in the words, and his mouth curved in what might have been the beginning of a smile. "Though I admit, if I were looking for ranch work, I would be honored to work for someone with your skills." The compliment made something flutter in Sadie's stomach, and she focused hard on driving the team to cover her reaction. "How did you become a stock detective?" "Used to work ranches all over California and Nevada," Kade said. "Started when I was 14, after my parents died of cholera. Worked my way up from stable hand to foreman by the time I was 22. Then I got hired on to track down some cattle thieves who had been hitting the ranches where I worked. Turned out I had a knack for it. The Cattlemen's Association offered me a permanent position 2 years ago, and I have been doing it ever since. You like it? Sadie asked, genuinely curious. Kade considered the question, his brow furrowing slightly. I like that I am good at it. I like solving the puzzle of where they go and how they operate. I like bringing them to justice. He paused. But it is lonely work, always on the trail, never staying in one place long enough to build anything permanent. Sometimes I miss having land of my own, a place to come home to. Sadie understood that feeling down to her bones, the deep need for a place that belonged to you and you alone. Why not buy yourself a ranch then? You must make decent money as a stock detective. Decent enough, Kade agreed. But ranching takes more than money. It takes time and attention and being there every day to do the work. Hard to do that when you are riding all over California tracking rustlers. He looked at her again, and this time his gaze lingered. You make it look easier than it is. Nothing easy about it, Sadie said, but nothing worth doing ever is. They lapsed into companionable silence after that, the wagon rattling along the road toward Sonora, while the sun climbed higher in the cloudless sky. In the back, the rustlers had given up complaining and sat in sullen quiet, their hands bound and their dreams of easy money lying dead in the dust of Sadie's north pasture. Sadie found herself acutely aware of Kade beside her, the solid warmth of him, the way his hands rested easy on his knees, the faint smell of leather and horse and coffee that seemed to surround him. She tried to remember the last time she had sat this close to a man who was not trying to tell her how to run her ranch, or suggesting she should sell out and move to town where a woman belonged. But her mind came up empty. Maybe there had never been a time like this, easy and comfortable and edged with something that felt almost like possibility. Sonora came into view as they crested the final hill, sprawling out below them in a collection of wooden buildings and dusty streets that had boomed during the gold rush days and settled into quieter prosperity afterward. The town had maybe 800 residents now, enough to support a sheriff's office, a general store, a hotel, 2 saloons, a church, and various other businesses that served the ranches and small mines scattered through the surrounding hills. Sadie drove straight to the sheriff's office on the main street, and several people stopped to stare as they passed, no doubt wondering why a woman was driving a wagon full of tied-up men through town on a Sunday morning. Sheriff Tom Coleman was a big man in his mid-50s, with a gray beard and sharp eyes that missed very little. He came out of his office as Sadie pulled up, his hand resting on the gun at his hip until he recognized her. "Sadie Kingston, what have you brought me?" "Rustlers," Sadie said simply. "5 of them. They hit my north pasture this morning and I objected." The sheriff's bushy eyebrows climbed toward his hairline as he took in the scene. 5 bound men in the back of Sadie's wagon, Kade Voss sitting beside her, and Sadie herself looking rumpled but pleased with herself. "You caught all 5 of them, roped everyone," Kade said before Sadie could answer. "I showed up after the fact. Miss Kingston handled it herself." Sheriff Coleman let out a long whistle and shook his head slowly. "Well, I will be damned, begging your pardon for the language, Sadie." He moved to the back of the wagon and looked over the rustlers, his expression hardening as he recognized a couple of them. "The Brennan gang. We have been looking for you boys. You are wanted in 3 counties for cattle theft and worse." The rest of the morning passed in a blur of statements and paperwork, with Sadie recounting the events of the dawn raid over and over, while a deputy wrote it all down in painstaking longhand. Kade gave his own statement about tracking the gang from Jamestown, confirming that these were the same men responsible for the raid that had killed a rancher down south. By the time they finished, it was past noon, and Sadie's stomach was growling loud enough to be embarrassing. Sheriff Coleman counted out a reward from the Cattlemen's Association Fund, $75 that represented more money than Sadie usually saw in a month. She tried to split it with Kade, but he waved her off. "You earned it. I just tied them up after you did all the real work." "You tracked them for 3 days," Sadie protested. "And you caught them," Kade said firmly. "Take the money, Miss Kingston. Buy yourself some new cattle or fix your barn roof or whatever you need. You earned it fair and square." In the end, Sadie pocketed the money and treated them both to lunch at the hotel restaurant, a meal of roast beef and potatoes and fresh bread that tasted like heaven after the morning she had had. They sat at a corner table, and Sadie found herself relaxing in Kade's company, laughing at his dry observations about the other diners and sharing stories about ranch life and the odd characters who populated the California hill country. He was easy to talk to, she realized, with a quiet sense of humor that snuck up on you and a way of listening that made you feel like every word mattered. By the time they finished eating, she had told him more about her life than she had told anyone in years, and the realization should have alarmed her, but somehow did not. They walked back to the wagon together through the warm afternoon sunlight, past shops just reopening after the Sunday lunch hour and families out for a stroll in their church clothes. Kade helped her up onto the driver's seat, his hand warm and steady on her elbow, and then climbed up beside her one more time. Sadie gathered the reins and looked at him, suddenly reluctant to say goodbye even though she knew he had his own work to get back to. "Where will you go now?" "Back to the association office. Eventually," Kade said. "First I need to check in with a couple of ranches east of here, make sure they have not had any trouble. After that," he shrugged, "wherever the next job takes me." Sadie nodded, trying to ignore the small pang of disappointment in her chest. Of course he would be leaving. That was his job, moving from place to place, never staying long enough to put down roots. It was none of her business anyway. She had known him for less than a day. "Well, thank you for your help this morning, even if I did do most of the work." That earned her a genuine smile, and it transformed his serious face into something warm and approachable that made her breath catch. "It was my pleasure, Miss Kingston, truly." He hesitated, then added, "Would you mind if I stopped by your ranch in a few days, when I am done with my rounds? I would like to make sure you had no more trouble and, Sadie prompted when he trailed off. "And I would like to see you again," Kade said simply. "If you would not mind the company." Heat flooded Sadie's face, but she met his eyes steadily. "I would not mind at all." They parted at the edge of town, Kade riding off on his buckskin toward the eastern ranches while Sadie drove her wagon back toward home. The afternoon sun was warm on her shoulders, and the hills rolled away in every direction, gold and green and beautiful under the endless sky. Sadie found herself humming as she drove, some half-remembered tune from her childhood, and there was a lightness in her chest that had nothing to do with the $75 in her pocket, and everything to do with the promise of seeing Kade Voss again. The next 3 days passed in the usual rhythm of ranch work, checking cattle, mending fence, mucking stables, hauling water, and 100 other tasks that filled the hours from dawn to dusk. Sadie threw herself into the work with even more energy than usual, trying not to think about when Kade might return or if he would return at all. Maybe he had just been being polite when he said he wanted to see her again. Maybe he had forgotten all about her already, swept up in his next case and the next town. She told herself it did not matter, that she had been perfectly fine on her own for 6 years and would continue to be fine regardless. But the pep talk rang hollow even in her own head. On the 4th day, Sadie was in the north pasture fixing the fence where the rustlers had cut it, her hands moving automatically through the familiar motions of twisting wire and setting posts. The afternoon was warm and still, with hawks circling overhead and meadowlarks calling from the tall grass. She was so focused on her work that she did not hear the horse approaching until it was quite close, and she straightened up with her heart suddenly pounding, one hand going to the knife at her belt before she recognized the buckskin gelding and its rider. Kade Voss looked tired, dust coating his clothes and stubble darkening his jaw, but his face lit up when he saw her in a way that made Sadie's breath catch. "Miss Kingston, Mr. Voss," Sadie said, trying to sound casual even as her pulse raced. "You look like you have been riding hard." "Wanted to get back here," Kade said simply. He swung down from his horse and walked over to where she stood by the half-repaired fence. "Had to check 6 ranches and deal with a boundary dispute and calm down a rancher who was convinced his neighbor was stealing water. Took longer than I expected." "But you came back," Sadie said softly. "I said I would." Kade's dark eyes held hers, serious and intent. "I do not say things I do not mean." They stood there in the middle of the pasture with the fence between them, and Sadie felt the moment stretch out like taffy, sweet and almost unbearable. "Finally," she said, "I am glad you came back." "So am I," Kade said, and the warmth in his voice made her insides flutter. "Can I help you with that fence? I am fair hand at repair work." They worked together as the afternoon slipped toward evening, their hands finding an easy rhythm as they spliced wire and braced posts. Kade was good company, telling her stories about the ranches he had visited and the colorful characters he had met, making her laugh with his dry observations and keen eye for human absurdity. When the fence was finally repaired to Sadie's satisfaction, the sun was painting the western sky in shades of orange and crimson, and her stomach was reminding her that she had skipped lunch in her eagerness to finish the work. "Stay for supper," Sadie said impulsively. "It will not be anything fancy, just stew and biscuits, but you look like you could use a hot meal." Kade hesitated only a moment before nodding. "I would like that, thank you." They rode back to the ranch house together, Sadie on maple and Kade on his buckskin, and the evening light turned everything golden and soft around them. In the barn, they unsaddled their horses side by side, moving around each other with the unconscious coordination of people who understood the same rhythms. Sadie found herself acutely aware of Kade's presence, the way his shoulder brushed hers as they reached for the same brush, the sound of his quiet humming as he worked, the simple pleasure of not being alone for once. Inside the house, Sadie stirred up the fire in the stove and put the stew on to heat while Kade washed up at the basin. The small house felt different with someone else in it, more alive somehow, and Sadie moved around her kitchen with a strange fluttery feeling in her chest that she tried very hard to ignore. When the food was ready, they sat at her small table and ate in comfortable silence, the kind that did not need filling with unnecessary words. Outside, the evening chorus of crickets and frogs started up, and the first stars began to appear in the deepening blue of the sky. "This is good," Kade said, mopping up the last of his stew with a biscuit. "Better than anything I have had in weeks." "Food always tastes better when you eat it at a table instead of over a campfire," Sadie said. She hesitated, then added, "You could stay the night if you want." "I have an extra room used to be my father's. Nothing fancy, just a bed and a bureau, but better than sleeping on the ground." Kade looked at her across the table, and something passed between them in the lamplight, a question and an answer all at once. "I do not want to impose." "You are not," Sadie said firmly. "I am offering because I want to, and because—" She trailed off, unsure how to put into words the feeling that had been growing in her chest since the moment he had ridden up to her north pasture 4 days ago. The sense of connection and possibility that she had never experienced with anyone else. Because, Kade prompted gently. Sadie took a breath and decided to be brave. Because I like having you here. Because you do not treat me like I am strange for running this ranch alone or try to tell me what I should be doing instead. Because when you look at me, you see who I actually am, not who you think a woman should be. And that is rare, that is special, and I do not want you to ride away just yet. The words hung in the air between them, honest and vulnerable and terrifying. Kade did not look away, and his expression was soft with something that looked like wonder. I do not want to ride away either, he said quietly. I have been thinking about you constantly since I left, about the way you charged into that pasture without hesitation, about the sound of your laugh, about how you built this place from nothing and made it yours. I have met a lot of people in my work, Sadie, but I have never met anyone like you. Hearing him use her first name sent a shiver down her spine, intimate and right. Kade, she said, testing out his name, and she saw his eyes darken in response. They sat there looking at each other across the narrow table, the remains of their meal forgotten, and Sadie felt like she was standing on the edge of something vast and unknown and absolutely inevitable. Kade cleared his throat and stood up abruptly, beginning to gather the dishes. Let me help you clean up. They washed the dishes together in the basin, working side by side in the small kitchen, and every accidental touch of their hands felt electric. When everything was clean and put away, Sadie showed Kade to her father's old room, trying not to feel self-conscious about the worn quilt on the bed and the faded curtains at the window. It is not much, she said. It is perfect, Kade said. He set his saddle bags down on the chair in the corner and turned to face her, and they were suddenly very close in the small room, close enough that Sadie could see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes and count the lines that crinkled at the corners when he smiled. Thank you, Sadie. For the meal and the room and everything. You are welcome, Sadie managed, her voice coming out slightly breathless. They stood there for a long moment, neither moving, the air between them charged with possibility. Then Kade reached out slowly and brushed a strand of hair from her face, his fingers gentle against her cheek, and Sadie's eyes fluttered closed at the contact. I should let you get some rest, Kade said, his voice rough. Yes, Sadie agreed, but neither of them moved. Finally, with what felt like enormous effort, she stepped back and toward the door. Good night, Kade. Good night, Sadie. She fled to her own room and closed the door, then leaned against it with her heart racing and her skin still tingling where he had touched her face. This was madness. She barely knew him. But even as her rational mind tried to apply the brakes, her heart was racing ahead, already half in love with a man who lived his life on the road and would probably be gone again in a day or two. She should protect herself, she thought. She should be sensible and careful and not let herself feel too much too fast. But when she finally fell asleep that night, it was with a smile on her face and dreams of dark eyes and gentle hands. Morning came bright and clear, and Sadie woke to find Kade already up and working, feeding her chickens and hauling water to the stock troughs. She stood in the doorway of the house with her coffee and watched him move through the familiar chores with easy competence, and something in her chest swelled warm and bright. When he saw her watching, he smiled and waved, and she found herself smiling back like a fool. They worked together all that day, checking fence lines and doctoring a cow with an infected cut, and moving the herd to fresh pasture. Kade was good help, strong and capable and willing to take direction without getting defensive about it. And Sadie found herself wishing desperately that he could stay longer, that this easy partnership could be more than just a brief moment carved out of their very different lives. But she did not say anything, just tried to memorize every detail of the day so she could hold on to it after he left. That evening, they sat on the porch steps and watched the sunset paint the sky in shades of rose and lavender, a bottle of whiskey passing back and forth between them. Sadie was pleasantly warm from the alcohol and the day's work, her body tired in the good way that came from physical labor. Kade sat close beside her, their shoulders touching, and she found herself leaning into the contact like a flower turning toward the sun. "I need to head out tomorrow," Kade said finally, and even though Sadie had been expecting it, the words still hit like a punch to the stomach. "The association has another case for me down near Sacramento, possible horse theft ring." "I understand," Sadie said, proud that her voice came out steady. "That is your job." "Yes," Kade agreed. He was quiet for a moment, then said, "But I do not want to go, not really. For the first time in 5 years, I find myself resenting the work that takes me away instead of being grateful for it." Sadie turned to look at him, her breath catching at the expression on his face. "What are you saying?" "I am saying that I think I am falling in love with you, Sadie Kingston," Kade said quietly. "I know it is fast and probably foolish, and I know my life is not set up for this kind of thing, but I cannot help how I feel. These past 2 days have been the best I have had in years, and the thought of riding away from you tomorrow makes me feel like I am leaving part of myself behind." The words hung in the air between them, brave and honest and everything Sadie had been feeling but was too afraid to say. She set down the whiskey bottle with shaking hands and turned to face him fully. "I am falling in love with you too. I have been trying not to because I knew you would have to leave, but my heart does not seem to care about logic or sense. It just wants you." Kade cupped her face in both his hands, his touch infinitely gentle, and leaned in slowly until their foreheads rested together. "Then what do we do about it?" "I do not know," Sadie whispered, "but I know I do not want to say goodbye forever." "Neither do I," Kade said. He pulled back just enough to look into her eyes. What if I came back whenever I could, between cases whenever I have a few days free? It would not be regular and it would not be easy, but I could come back to you, if you would want that." "I would want that," Sadie said immediately. "I would want anything that means I get to see you again." Kade smiled then, bright and full of relief, and closed the distance between them. Their first kiss was soft and sweet, a gentle exploration that made Sadie's toes curl in her boots. She had been kissed before, fumbling attempts by boys at barn dances when she was younger, but nothing had ever felt like this, like coming home and flying at the same time. When they finally pulled apart, they were both breathing hard, and Sadie's hand had somehow found its way into Kade's hair. "Well," Kade said, slightly dazed, "that was." "Yes," Sadie agreed, and then they were kissing again, deeper this time, 6 years of loneliness and longing pouring out of her into this moment. Kade's arms came around her, pulling her close, and Sadie melted into his embrace with a sigh of pure contentment. They stayed like that for a long time, trading kisses on the porch steps as the stars came out overhead, and the night sounds of the ranch surrounded them like a blessing. When they finally went to bed that night, it was to separate rooms, but Sadie lay awake for hours feeling the ghost of Kade's kisses on her lips and counting the minutes until morning came and she would have to watch him ride away. The thought was almost unbearable, but underneath the pain was a bright thread of hope. He would come back. He had promised. And Sadie had learned long ago that promises mattered, that words spoken in honesty were worth more than gold. Morning arrived too quickly, and Sadie helped Kade saddle his horse in the quiet before dawn, her movements automatic while her mind raced. He was really leaving. This fragile new thing between them would have to survive on faith and stolen moments, and the hope that the distance would not wear them down to nothing. Kade must have seen something of her thoughts in her face, because he stopped what he was doing and pulled her into his arms. "I will come back," he said firmly. "As soon as I can, I will come back to you. This is not goodbye, Sadie. It is just, see you later." "See you later," Sadie repeated, trying the words out. They sounded better than goodbye, more hopeful. She reached up and kissed him one more time, trying to pour all her feelings into it, all the love and longing and trust that she could not quite put into words. When they pulled apart, Kade's eyes were bright with emotion. "I love you," he said. "I know it is soon, but I do. I love you, and I will come back." "I love you too," Sadie whispered. "Ride safe." She stood in the yard and watched him ride away until he disappeared over the ridge, his buckskin gelding eating up the distance with long, easy strides. Then she turned and went back into the house that suddenly felt too empty, too quiet, too full of echoes. The coffee she poured tasted bitter, and the chores that waited for her felt overwhelming in a way they never had before. But she had survived loneliness for 6 years, and she could survive it a while longer, especially knowing that Kade would come back. He had promised, and she believed him. The days turned into weeks, and Sadie threw herself into ranch work with fierce determination. She hired a drifter named Charlie to help with the heavy labor, a wizened old cowboy who talked more to the horses than to humans, but was good with his hands, and did not balk at taking orders from a woman. Together, they repaired the barn roof, dug a new well, and added 50 more acres to the north pasture by buying out a neighbor who was moving back east. Sadie used the reward money from catching the Rustlers as a down payment, and the expansion felt like a promise to herself. This ranch had a future, and she would be here to see it. She received her first letter from Kade 3 weeks after he left, delivered by the mail carrier who made the rounds between Sonora and the outlying ranches. Sadie took it inside and sat at the kitchen table, her hands trembling slightly as she broke the seal. His handwriting was neat and precise, and the words made her heart ache with missing him and joy at hearing from him all at once. He wrote about the horse theft case, which had turned out to be more complicated than expected, involving a ring of thieves operating across multiple counties. He wrote about the endless riding and the bad coffee and the tiny hotel rooms in forgettable towns. But mostly he wrote about missing her, about remembering the way she laughed and the feel of her in his arms and the life he was starting to imagine with her. He promised he would come back as soon as the case was wrapped up, probably another 2 or 3 weeks. Sadie read the letter 3 times, then tucked it carefully into her bureau drawer and sat down to write a reply. She told him about the new acreage and Charlie and the heifer that had given birth to twins. She told him about the spring flowers blooming in the meadow and the way the evenings were getting warmer. But mostly she told him that she missed him, that the ranch felt different without him there, that she was counting the days until he came back. She signed it with love and gave it to the mail carrier the next time he came through, then tried not to calculate how long it would take to reach Kade and how long it might be before she got another reply. The letters became a lifeline over the next months, going back and forth between them like a conversation conducted in slow motion. Kade's cases took him all over California, from the coastal valleys to the high country near the Nevada border, and Sadie lived vicariously through his descriptions, even as she shared the small daily triumphs and disasters of ranch life. He came back to visit twice during that first spring and summer, once for 4 days and once for nearly a week, and those stolen moments were precious beyond measure. They fell into an easy rhythm during his visits, working side by side during the day and sitting close together in the evenings, talking and laughing and learning each other in all the ways that mattered. By summer's end, Sadie knew she wanted to spend the rest of her life with this man, and she was almost certain he felt the same way. But neither of them had spoken about the future beyond vague wishes and hopes, and the uncertainty was starting to wear on her. How long could they continue like this, seeing each other in brief snatches, building a relationship in the cracks between his work? She loved him desperately, but she also loved her ranch, the land she had fought so hard to keep and build. She could not give it up, even for Kade. And she did not think she should have to. The crisis came in early September when Kade showed up unannounced on a Tuesday afternoon, riding hard and looking grim. Sadie was in the barn, and she dropped the pitchfork she was holding and ran to meet him, her heart in her throat. "What is wrong?" "What happened?" Kade swung down from his horse and pulled her into his arms, holding her tight. "Nothing is wrong. Everything is fine. But I need to talk to you about something important, and I could not wait to do it in a letter." They sat on the porch steps, their usual spot, and Kade took her hands in his. "The Cattlemen's Association offered me a promotion, head of operations for the entire state. It would mean a good salary, a house in Sacramento, a real office. No more traveling, no more living out of saddlebags. A stable, predictable life." Sadie's heart sank. Sacramento was 200 miles away, too far for casual visits, and she knew what this meant even before Kade finished explaining. "That is wonderful," she made herself say. "You have worked so hard. You deserve the recognition." "I turned it down," Kade said simply. Sadie stared at him. "What? Why would you do that?" "Because it is not the life I want," Kade said. He lifted her hands to his lips and kissed them gently. "Because the life I want is here with you on this ranch." "I know it is asking a lot, Sadie. And I know I do not have much to offer beyond my skills and my labor and my heart. But I do not want to keep living out of hotel rooms and chasing rustlers across California. I want to wake up next to you every morning and work this land beside you and build something permanent and real, if you will have me." Sadie felt tears prick her eyes, joy and relief flooding through her in equal measure. "Are you asking what I think you are asking?" Kade reached into his pocket and pulled out a simple gold band, worn smooth with age. "It was my mother's. It is not fancy, but it is all I have to offer besides myself. Sadie Kingston, will you marry me? Will you let me stay here and be your partner in all things, ranching and life and everything in between?" "Yes," Sadie said, the word coming out choked with emotion. "Yes, of course, yes." She threw her arms around his neck and kissed him fiercely, tasting salt from her own tears, and Kade lifted her off the ground and spun her around, both of them laughing like children. When he finally set her down, he slipped the ring onto her finger, and it fit perfectly, like it had been waiting there all along. They were married 3 weeks later in the small church in Sonora, with Sheriff Coleman standing up as Kade's best man and the general store owner's wife serving as Sadie's attendant. It was a simple ceremony, nothing fancy, but to Sadie it felt like the most important day of her life. She wore a dress she had sewn herself from blue calico, and Kade wore his best shirt and a new vest. And when the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, the kiss they shared was witnessed by half the town and sealed with more love than Sadie had ever imagined possible. Kade moved into the ranch house that very day, his few possessions taking up barely a corner of the room that was now theirs instead of just hers. But it was not the things that mattered. It was the presence of him filling up all the empty spaces she had learned to ignore. He was there when she woke in the mornings, his arm warm around her waist. He was there at breakfast, reading the newspaper and stealing bites of her biscuit. He was there in the fields and the barn, and everywhere she looked, a partner in the truest sense, someone who saw her work and valued it, and contributed to it without trying to take it over or change it into something it was not. They fell into a rhythm over the next months, dividing up the ranch work according to their skills and preferences. Kade took over the heavy labor, building and repairing structures, breaking new horses, dealing with predators. Sadie managed the cattle breeding program, kept the books, and handled all the negotiations with buyers and suppliers. Together, they were more than the sum of their parts, and the ranch thrived under their combined attention. By the following spring, they had expanded the herd to nearly 200 head and added another 100 acres, and they were starting to earn a reputation as one of the best small operations in the county. But the best part, the part that made Sadie's heart sing every single day, was simply having someone to share it all with, someone to talk to over morning coffee and evening whiskey, someone to laugh with when things went right and strategize with when they went wrong, someone to hold in the night and wake up beside in the morning, someone who loved her exactly as she was, fierce and independent and utterly herself, and never once asked her to be anything different. They got the news that Sadie was pregnant in late summer of 1886, almost exactly a year after they had gotten married. Sadie had suspected for a few weeks, but had not said anything, wanting to be sure before she got Kade's hopes up. When the doctor in Sonora confirmed it, she rode home with her heart pounding and her mind racing. How would Kade react? They had talked about children in abstract terms, someday when the ranch was more established, but this was happening now, ready or not. She found him in the barn, mucking out stalls, and the sight of him working in his shirt sleeves, his hair falling into his eyes, made her heart clench with love. He looked up when she came in, and his face lit up the way it always did when he saw her. "How was town? Get everything on the list?" "Yes," Sadie said. She set down the basket of supplies and walked over to him, suddenly nervous. "And I got some other news, too, from the doctor." Kade went very still, his eyes searching her face. "What kind of news?" "The good kind," Sadie said quickly. "At least I think it is good." "I hope you think it is good." She took a breath. "I am pregnant, Kade. We are going to have a baby." For a moment, Kade just stared at her, his expression unreadable. Then his face broke into the biggest smile she had ever seen, and he dropped the pitchfork and closed the distance between them in 2 strides, sweeping her up into his arms. "We are going to have a baby," he repeated, wonder in his voice. "Sadie, that is the best news I have ever heard." He kissed her then, deep and sweet and full of promise, and Sadie felt the last of her nervousness dissolve into pure joy. They were going to have a baby. They were going to be a family. Everything she had built here, the ranch and the life and the love, it was all going to continue and grow into something even bigger and more beautiful than she had imagined. The pregnancy was not easy. Sadie was sick for the first 4 months, barely able to keep anything down. And even after that passed, she found herself exhausted in a way she had never experienced before. Kade took over more and more of her usual tasks, hiring on an extra hand to help with the heavy work, but it made Sadie feel useless and frustrated. She was not used to being the one who needed help, and she chafed at the limitations her changing body imposed. "You are growing a human being," Kade said patiently, for what felt like the 100th time. "That is work too, important work. Let me take care of you for once, Sadie. Let me do this." So she tried to be patient, tried to rest when her body demanded it and accept help when it was offered. She spent her time planning the nursery and sewing tiny clothes, and reading everything she could find about childbirth and infant care. Kade was endlessly attentive, bringing her tea and rubbing her aching back and reading aloud to her in the evenings from the books she loved. He was going to be a wonderful father, Sadie thought, watching him talk to her growing belly like the baby could already hear him. Patient and kind and devoted, everything a child could need. Their son was born on a bright March morning in 1887, after a labor that lasted nearly 20 hours and left Sadie exhausted and triumphant in equal measure. Kade was there the whole time, holding her hand and wiping her face and murmuring encouragement, and when the baby finally emerged with a lusty cry, the look on his face was something Sadie knew she would remember for the rest of her life. Pure wonder, pure love, pure joy. They named him Thomas after Sadie's father, and he had Kade's dark eyes and Sadie's stubborn chin. From the very beginning, he was a happy baby, easy and content, and Sadie fell in love with him more deeply every day. Being a mother was harder than she had expected, but also more rewarding, and she found herself marveling at the way this tiny person had changed everything about her life, without diminishing any of the parts she had fought so hard to build. She was still a rancher, still capable and competent and strong. But now she was also a mother, and the two roles fit together more naturally than she had dared to hope. Kade was besotted with his son, spending hours just watching him sleep or holding him against his chest while he did paperwork, or sang him nonsense songs in a surprisingly decent voice. Sadie would watch them together, her two favorite people in the world, and feel a contentment so profound it was almost frightening. This was everything she had ever wanted, everything she had not even known to dream of. A thriving ranch, a partner who was truly her equal, a child to love and raise and pass this land down to someday. It felt too good to be true, and sometimes she woke in the night with her heart racing, afraid it would all disappear like morning mist. But it did not disappear. Instead, it just got better, deeper, more solid. Thomas grew from a baby into a toddler, learning to walk and talk and help with the simple ranch chores. Sadie's cattle breeding program earned awards at the county fair 3 years running. Kade was elected to the board of the Cattlemen's Association, bringing his expertise without having to travel constantly. They added a second story to the ranch house and hired a permanent ranch hand, a serious young man named James who was good with horses and respectful of Sadie's authority. The ranch that had been barely surviving when Sadie inherited it was now one of the most prosperous in the county, and she had done it without compromising who she was or giving up control to anyone else. Their second child, a daughter they named Mary, was born in 1890 when Thomas was 3. She was quieter than her brother, but just as stubborn, and she had Sadie's dark hair and Kade's serious expression. Thomas was fascinated by his baby sister, always wanting to help with her care, and Sadie felt her heart expand to make room for this new love without diminishing the old. Kade was just as devoted to his daughter as he had been to his son, pacing the floor with her at night when she fussed, and telling her elaborate stories that made no sense, but always made her smile. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm of work and family, seasons passing in their familiar cycle. The children grew, learning to ride and rope and handle cattle almost before they could read. Thomas was bold and adventurous, always pushing boundaries, while Mary was more thoughtful, watching everything with those serious eyes before making her moves. Sadie loved them both fiercely, differently, completely. And through it all, her partnership with Kade only deepened, built on the foundation of shared work and mutual respect, and a love that had started fast but grown strong through the years. On the morning of their 10th anniversary, Sadie woke before dawn and slipped out of bed carefully, trying not to disturb Kade. She dressed quietly and went out to the porch to watch the sunrise, something she had not done in a while. The ranch was quiet around her, peaceful in the pre-dawn stillness, and she let herself simply sit and be present in this moment. So much had changed since that morning 10 years ago when she had chased down 5 rustlers before breakfast and met the man who would become her husband. But at the core, she was still the same person, fierce and independent and determined to build the life she wanted on her own terms. The door opened behind her, and Kade came out with 2 cups of coffee, handing her one before sitting down beside her on the steps. They sat in comfortable silence as the sky lightened, and Sadie leaned her head against his shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of him. 10 years, she said softly. Best 10 years of my life, Kade said, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. I was just thinking about that morning when I rode up and found you had already caught all 5 rustlers. I thought you were the most amazing thing I had ever seen. I still am, Sadie said with a smile. Yes, you are, Kade agreed seriously. Even more so now. You built something extraordinary here, Sadie. This ranch, our family, the life we have. I am so grateful I get to be part of it. Sadie turned to look at him, seeing the lines that had formed at the corners of his eyes and the gray starting to thread through his dark hair. He was 38 now and she was 33, and they were not the same young people who had fallen in love in a single breathless week. They were better, she thought, deeper, more real. I could not have done any of it without you, she said honestly. You made it possible for me to have everything, to not have to choose between the ranch and a family. You made me believe I could have it all. You always could have, Kade said. You just needed a partner who saw that too. They kissed as the sun broke over the horizon, painting everything in shades of gold, and Sadie felt the same flutter in her stomach that she had felt that very first time back when everything was new and uncertain. Some things, she thought, never changed. The love was still there, still strong, still growing. And it would continue to grow through whatever came next, through the years and decades that stretched ahead of them. This was what happily ever after looked like. Not a perfect fairy tale ending, but a real life built on hard work and compromise and choosing each other every single day. The children came tumbling out of the house eventually, demanding breakfast and attention and help with various urgent childhood concerns. Sadie and Kade exchanged a smile over their heads and went inside to start the day, together as they had been for 10 years, and as they would continue to be for all the years to come. The ranch waited for them outside, 350 acres of California hill country that Sadie had claimed as her own and defended and built into something lasting. It would be there for Thomas and Mary someday, a legacy of what one determined woman and her equally determined partner could create when they worked together. But that was a long way off still. For now, there was breakfast to make and cattle to check, and 100 small tasks that filled up the hours. There were children to raise and love to nurture, and a life to be lived fully and without regret. Sadie poured coffee and cracked eggs and listened to her family chatter around her, and she thought about that girl she had been, standing alone in her north pasture with a rope in her hand and determination in her heart. She had come so far, but she had not left that girl behind. She had just grown into someone bigger, someone who could hold more, someone who had learned that strength did not mean doing everything alone. It meant knowing when to accept help and when to offer it, when to stand your ground and when to bend, when to fight and when to love. And she had learned, most importantly, that the strongest foundation for any life was built on partnership, on finding someone who saw you as you truly were and loved you for it, who did not try to change you or diminish you, but instead helped you become even more yourself. Kade had given her that gift, and she had given it back to him, and together they had created something that would outlast them both. As the years continued to pass, Sadie and Kade watched their children grow into capable, independent people who loved the ranch as much as their parents did. Thomas turned out to have a gift for dealing with buyers and negotiating prices, and by the time he was 18, he was handling most of the business side of the operation. Mary was quieter, but had inherited her mother's skill with a rope and her father's patience with difficult animals. She could gentle the wildest horse or doctor the sickest cow, and she did it all with a calm competence that made Sadie proud. The ranch continued to expand and prosper, weathering droughts and economic downturns and all the other challenges that came with agricultural life in California. Sadie made a point of hiring women when she could, remembering how hard it had been for her in the beginning, and several of the best hands who ever worked for her were women who had been turned away from other ranches for their gender. Kade supported these decisions without question, and together they built a reputation as fair employers who cared more about skill and dedication than about conforming to other people's expectations. In 1895, when Sadie was 41 and Kade was 46, they received an unexpected visitor. A young woman reporter from a San Francisco newspaper who was writing a series of articles about successful female ranchers. She spent 3 days at the ranch, following Sadie around and asking endless questions and taking notes in a leather-bound journal. Sadie was uncomfortable with the attention at first, but the reporter was genuinely interested and respectful. And by the end of the visit, Sadie found herself enjoying the chance to tell her story. The article came out 2 months later, and Sadie was amazed to see her life laid out in print for strangers to read. The reporter had captured something essential about what Sadie had built, about the determination and skill and sheer stubbornness it took to succeed as a woman in a man's world. She had also written beautifully about Sadie and Kade's partnership, about how they had managed to build a life where both of them could thrive without either one having to sacrifice their dreams or ambitions. The article ended with a quote from Sadie that she had not even remembered saying. "I did not set out to prove anything to anyone. I just wanted to keep my father's ranch and build a good life. But if my story helps some other woman believe she can do the same thing, then I am glad to share it." The article brought more attention than Sadie had expected. She received letters from women all over California and beyond, thanking her for her example and asking for advice. Some of them came to visit, young women looking for work or older women wanting to know how to start their own operations. Sadie welcomed them all, shared what she knew freely, and tried to live up to the accidental role model status she had acquired. It was strange and sometimes overwhelming, but it also felt meaningful in a way she had not anticipated. She had not just built a ranch. She had apparently helped pave a path for others to follow, and that legacy mattered as much as the land itself. Thomas got married in 1897 to a school teacher named Elizabeth, a practical woman with a good sense of humor who fit into the family like she had always been there. Mary announced her engagement the following year to James, the ranch hand who had worked for them for nearly a decade and proven himself to be patient, capable, and completely devoted to her. Both weddings were joyful celebrations, and both young couples chose to stay on the ranch rather than striking out on their own, building houses on the property and becoming partners in the operation. Sadie and Kade found themselves transitioning gradually from running everything themselves to mentoring the younger generation, teaching them everything they knew and slowly stepping back to let them take the lead. It was bittersweet in some ways, acknowledging that their children were adults now with their own lives and families. But it was also deeply satisfying, seeing the ranch continue and grow under new hands while knowing that the foundation they had built was solid enough to support whatever came next. Sadie was 50 when her first grandchild was born, Thomas and Elizabeth's son, and holding that tiny new life in her arms felt like a miracle all over again. The circle continuing, the legacy passing down, the land enduring. Kade's hair went completely gray, and Sadie found wrinkles around her own eyes that had not been there before. Their bodies were not quite as strong or fast as they had been, and some mornings Sadie's joints ached in a way that made her feel every one of her years. But they were healthy and happy and still deeply in love, still choosing each other every day, still finding joy in the simple rhythms of their shared life. They took evening walks around the property, moving slower now but seeing more, noticing the small beauties that they had sometimes rushed past in their younger years. They sat on the porch in the evenings with their grandchildren playing at their feet, and they remembered that morning when it had all begun. Rustlers in the north pasture and a rope in Sadie's hand, and a future that neither of them could have predicted but both had built together. In 1905, on a warm spring evening when Sadie was 53 and Kade was 58, they celebrated their 25th anniversary with the whole family gathered on the ranch. Thomas and Elizabeth had 3 children now. Mary and James had 2. The house they had expanded years ago was full to bursting with laughter and love and life, exactly as Sadie had always imagined it could be. After dinner, after the children had been put to bed and the young people had drifted off to their own homes, Sadie and Kade found themselves alone on the porch steps once again, in the spot where they had shared so many important moments over the years. 25 years, Kade said, echoing that conversation from 15 years earlier. Still the best decision I ever made, asking you to marry me. Best decision I ever made, saying yes, Sadie replied. She took his hand, feeling the calluses and scars that matched her own, the physical record of all the work they had done together. Do you ever regret turning down that promotion? Wonder what life would have been like if you had taken the job in Sacramento? Kade shook his head without hesitation. Not once, not for a single moment. This is exactly where I was meant to be, Sadie. With you, building this life, I have no regrets about any of it. Neither do I, Sadie said softly, and it was true. There had been hard times and sad times and frustrating times, but through it all, she had never once wished for a different life or a different path. This was hers, every bit of it, the struggles and the triumphs and everything in between. She had claimed it and built it and defended it, and she had done it without compromising who she was or what she believed in. And she had found love along the way, the kind of deep, abiding love that grew stronger with time instead of fading, that supported instead of constraining, that enhanced instead of diminishing. They sat there as the stars came out, 2 people who had found each other against all odds and built something extraordinary together. The ranch stretched out around them in the darkness, solid and enduring and theirs in every way that mattered. 350 acres of California hill country that a determined young woman had refused to lose, and a traveling stock detective had chosen to make his home. Land that would pass to their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, carrying forward the legacy of what was possible when 2 people decided to build a life together based on love and respect and partnership. The night was peaceful, full of cricket song and the distant sound of cattle settling for the evening. Somewhere in the house, one of the grandchildren cried out briefly in their sleep and then quieted again. The world continued its turning, indifferent to the small dramas of human lives, but Sadie felt significant anyway, felt like her life had mattered and would continue to matter long after she was gone. She had left her mark on this land and on the people she loved, and that was enough. More than enough. It was everything. Kade's arm came around her shoulders, pulling her close, and Sadie leaned into his warmth with a contented sigh. Tomorrow there would be work to do, as there always was on a ranch. Cattle to check and fences to mend, and 1,000 small tasks that kept the operation running. But tonight, there was just this. Two people who had found each other and built a life worth living, sitting together in the peaceful darkness and feeling grateful for every moment they had been given. "I love you," Sadie said, simple words that carried the weight of 25 years and still felt as true as they had that very first time. "I love you too," Kade replied, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Always have. Always will." And there on the porch steps where so much of their story had unfolded, they sat together and watched the stars wheel overhead, and felt the solid presence of the land beneath them, and knew with absolute certainty that they had found exactly what they were meant to find. Each other, this place, this life. The Rustlers who had hit the North Pasture at dawn all those years ago had given them the gift of meeting, but everything that came after had been their own creation, built moment by moment and choice by choice into something lasting and real and true. It was a love story worth telling, worth living, worth passing down through the generations as a reminder of what was possible when two people decided to face the world together as partners in every sense of the word. The years that followed brought their share of changes and challenges. The old century gave way to the new, and with it came new technologies and new ways of doing things. Automobiles began to replace horses on the roads, though Sadie remained stubbornly devoted to her horses and always would be. The ranch adapted and evolved, adding modern conveniences when they made sense, but never losing sight of the fundamental work that had to be done regardless of what tools you used to do it. Thomas took over more and more of the day-to-day operations, and Sadie found herself becoming an advisor and teacher rather than the primary decision-maker. It was a strange transition, learning to step back and trust the younger generation to carry things forward, but also a satisfying one. The ranch would endure. The work would continue. The land would be cared for. That was what mattered most. Kade's health began to fail slowly in his early 70s, nothing dramatic but a gradual diminishment that Sadie watched with growing concern. He did not complain, but she could see him slowing down, moving more carefully, taking longer to recover from even small exertions. The doctor in Sonora said it was just age catching up with him, nothing to be done except rest and take things easy. Sadie made sure he did exactly that, taking over tasks he had always handled and enlisting their children to help with anything too heavy for her alone. Kade protested at first, insisting he was fine, but eventually he accepted the new reality with the same grace he brought to everything else. They spent more time together in those years, Sadie cutting back her own involvement in the ranch to be with him. They took slow walks around the property, remembering all the things they had done and built and experienced together. They sat on the porch and watched the grandchildren play, and later the great-grandchildren, a whole new generation that carried forward the legacy they had created. They talked about everything and nothing, the easy conversation of people who had known each other so long and so well that words were sometimes unnecessary. And they loved each other still, with the deep, abiding love of people who had chosen each other again and again across decades of shared life. Kade died peacefully in his sleep, one spring morning in 1915, at the age of 70. Sadie woke to find him gone, his face peaceful and his hand still warm in hers, and she sat with him for a long time before calling for help. The grief was enormous, a black hole that threatened to swallow her whole, but underneath it was gratitude for all the years they had been given and comfort in knowing he had lived a good life and died peacefully surrounded by love. They buried him on a hill overlooking the ranch, with a simple stone marker that read Kade Voss, beloved husband, father, and partner. Sadie thought she might not survive losing him, that the grief would be too much to bear. But she was tougher than she knew, and she had work to do still. Grandchildren to mentor and a ranch to oversee, and a life to continue living even though it looked different now. She found solace in the familiar rhythms of ranch work, in the presence of her children and grandchildren, in the solid, enduring presence of the land itself. Kade was gone, but he was also everywhere, in the buildings they had constructed together and the cattle they had bred and the children they had raised. His legacy was woven into every aspect of the ranch, and as long as the ranch endured, so would he. Sadie lived another 14 years after Kade died, active and engaged and still offering advice to anyone who asked for it. She was there when her great-great-grandchildren were born, tiny new lives that represented the 8th generation of family to know this land. She was there when Thomas retired and handed over control of the ranch to his oldest son. She was there through droughts and good years, through family weddings and funerals, through all the ordinary, extraordinary moments that make up a life. And through it all, she carried Kade with her, not as a weight of grief but as a presence of love, a reminder of what they had built together and what endured even after death parted them. On her 87th birthday, surrounded by more family than she could easily count, Sadie sat on the porch of the ranch house and looked out over the land she had defended and built and loved for 70 years. Everything had changed and nothing had changed. The buildings were different, the technology was different, the people were different. But the land was the same, and the work was the same, and the fundamental truth at the heart of it all was the same. That a life well lived was built on hard work and determination, and the courage to claim what was yours and defend it against anyone who tried to take it away. She thought about that morning so long ago, when she had been 23 years old and determined and alone, standing in her north pasture with a rope in her hand and rustlers all around her. She thought about Kade riding up in the aftermath, serious and capable and seeing her exactly as she was. She thought about the first kiss and the first letter and the moment he had asked her to marry him. She thought about their children and grandchildren and all the generations that had come after, all the lives they had touched and shaped and made possible. And she thought about the love, the deep, abiding love that had sustained her through everything and carried her still even after Kade was gone. It had been a good life, Sadie decided. A very good life. She had no regrets about any of it, about the choices she had made or the path she had walked. She had been true to herself, had built something lasting, had loved and been loved in return. What more could anyone ask for? What better legacy could anyone leave behind? Sadie Kingston Voss died peacefully in her sleep on a warm summer night in 1929, at the age of 87. They buried her next to Kade on the hill overlooking the ranch, with a matching stone that read, Sadie Kingston Voss, beloved wife, mother, and pioneer. The whole county turned out for her funeral, people coming from miles around to pay their respects to a woman who had lived large and loved deeply and left the world better than she found it. The ranch continued, passed down through the generations just as Sadie had always intended. Her descendants carried forward the lessons she had taught them. That strength came from partnership, that determination could overcome almost any obstacle, and that the most important legacy anyone could leave was not wealth or status, but the example of a life well lived. They told stories about her to their children and grandchildren, about the morning she had roped 5 rustlers before the cowboy even got his horse saddled, about the love story that had started with a fast attraction and grown into something that lasted a lifetime and beyond. And on quiet spring mornings, when the light was just right and the California hills glowed gold in the sunshine, sometimes you could almost see them there on the porch steps, a dark-haired woman and a serious man sitting close together, their hands intertwined, and their faces turned toward each other with love and laughter, and the contentment of two people who had found exactly what they were searching for: each other, this place, this life. A love story for the ages, built on hard work and mutual respect, and the courage to build something extraordinary together. A reminder that the best partnerships were those where both people could thrive, where love enhanced rather than diminished, where two individuals came together to create something bigger and better than either could have built alone. The land endured, solid and beautiful under the endless California sky. And somewhere in the whisper of wind through the grass, and the distant call of cattle, and the laughter of children playing in the yard, the echo of that love story continued, proof that some things were strong enough to outlast death itself and carry forward into eternity.